Hello, welcome to first recorded tutorial that you're going to see in this class. So what this one is about is I'm going to be walking you through how to use basic drawing tools and how to transform, and the transformation tools as well. A few of them, not all of them. So it's a very basic worksheet. At the same time, it does cover pretty much all the basic skills that you'll need in this course. If you find that a particular sheet is too basic, then just feel free to skip ahead, and I'll show you which ones you can do that you could skip ahead to. There's quite a few artboards in this worksheet. One way, the easiest way to get around all the artboards is to use the artboard palette. So that allows you to skip forward and backwards. So make sure you have that open. Also pay attention to what I have on the screen. I have this orange circle around my cursor that'll help you locate where I am working on the screen. And I also have this other tool that I've added to the tutorial, which shows my keyboard shortcuts. So at any point, if I'm using the Command S, which is in the menu, but again, reaching out for the menu and grabbing those commands is just way too time consuming. You need to be able to do these things a lot quicker in order to get have any level of efficiency at all when working in Illustrator. So Illustrator has many ways to do the same thing. So you're going to see the same thing appearing in different places, and it really depends on the context of the type of task you're doing. Depends on whether or not, which one you should be using. In this case, I would almost always use Command S, and you can see that this will show up here as Command S. When I'm saving, Command C when I'm copying. There's nothing on nothing selected, so I can't copy, but Command Z is undo. So those things are keyboard shortcuts that are very important to start memorizing. So just a few can get you really far, really quick. Here you can see they're always here. If you can't remember the keyboard shortcut, just go up and choose it here. But after you choose it, so if in this case I want to undo it, I just want to take a minute and just visualize the Command Z. Just visualize Command Z, or maybe even do the Command Z. So go up here, just see what it is. So go up here and go, I can't even remember where it is because I never use the menu to find it. Oh yeah, here it is. So Command Z. So if I can't remember what the keyboard shortcut is, go find it in the menu, just don't use it. So here you can see undo, Command Z. I'm not going to use it. Instead, I'm going to use the keyboard shortcut, and that allows me to start memorizing these things. So I'm going to go ahead and get started here. Make sure that you're using the GD157 workspace that we set up together. And you can see here on the layers palette should be behind your properties palette, that there's two layers. There's all these artboards. There's 17 artboards, and there is two layers. You're going to be drawing on a layer called Draw here. The grid layer has all the worksheet prompts that I put in to make this a nice introduction to Illustrator. So for this first one, we're going to be using this tool here, which is called the pen tool. And you can see here the hotkey is P. So I'm just going to hit the letter P, and that gives me this, the pen tool. And the pen tool works, as we've seen in class already. Your first click gives you a point. And this point has no mass, it has no shape. In this case, it actually does have an attribute of, it does have a fill, but it has no stroke. It looks here like I've actually drawn a line and the line is sticking to the cursor. It's not. What Illustrator is showing this first stroke is right there, this anchor point is here, and then as I draw my cursor along, this guide is showing me where the next point is going and what that line is going to look like when I finish it. So if I click here, you can see that I've drawn a line. So I have 2 points that are connected by this line. Illustrator is going to want to keep drawing a line, and this can be a source of frustration. So all you do to end a line is you hit the escape key. Sometimes you'll see this doesn't work for me on the screen, and it's simply because my keyboard is a little bit broken. So here we've drawn a line. It has, I'm going to deselect it, so I'm going to take my selection tool and deselect. And if you zoom in, you can see that it almost looks like it has a stroke to it, but it doesn't. That's just a fill. It has no stroke. If I tried to print this, it wouldn't show up at all. Nothing would appear. So the way that I give it a stroke is I go to the Properties palette, and here you can see that it has a fill right now. I'm going to set the fill to none, and I'm going to set the stroke to black. So the Properties palette is context sensitive. It shows you information based on what you have selected, either the tool that you have selected or the object that you have selected on the screen. It allows you to modify the attributes for that. So I'm going to take my direct selection tool, and I'm going to grab this, and I'm going to try and put it right in the center here of the square. Just Illustrator is one of those tools that allows you to be very accurate. I'm zooming right now. I have a trackpad, so I can zoom in and out this way. If you have a mouse with a scroll wheel, you can zoom that way as well. There's also other keyboard commands for zooming in and out, and those are right here. So under View, you can zoom in and out with the plus and the command plus and minus, or there's these other presets too, right? So fit the artboard in the window, fit all in window. You can see where the shortcut is there as well. So if I click on this one, it'll fit the artboard in the window. And that is Command 0. So if I go back in here and I hit Command 0, that shows me the artboard. Okay, so let's move on to the next one. You can see this is basically a freeform line that's not closed. So let's draw another freeform line just to get used to this tool, and you're going to draw a few of these. So I'm going to draw one here like this. And if you don't see these lines, these magenta lines showing up, the way that you get them to appear, I'm going to hit escape, is by to View and Smart Guides. So without that, you can't see them. So if I turn this off, you're going to see that I no longer see that the magenta line. It just shows me the drawing tool line. So I just hit escape. So again, it'll save whatever the last setting is. So the last setting that I set for, I gave it a stroke of black and a fill of nothing. So it's going to keep doing that until I change it. Or in this case, until you change it. So maybe practice zooming in and out a little bit, just so you kind of get used to it. Whatever tool you have, if you're working with your MacBook, it can be, it's kind of nice to use the trackpad. I like the trackpad. I don't really like using a mouse. If you have a mouse, then just practice using the mouse. So this is a unclosed shape. Now let's make a closed line. So turn it into a shape. So again, using our pen tool, so just the P hotkey, and just going to keep doing the same thing. And again, Illustrator is telling me where the stroke is going to end. Go right here. And then you can see, when I approach where I started, you can see that the cursor changes to it adds a little circle around at the end of the cursor. So when I move up here, a little circle appears around it. So it actually changes the cursor to tell me I'm about to close the shape. So I'm going to go ahead and click there, and that gives me a closed shape. It's not going to keep trying to draw because the line is ended. Once it's closed, Illustrator understands it as a closed line. There's no way to continue that line. It's finished. What I can do is I can actually add strokes anywhere. So I can go here and I can add another stroke to this. And if I take my direct selection tool, I can actually move it. But the other thing that you can do, and this is where you can start adding more attributes to it, because now that we have a closed shape, we can give it a fill. So we can give it any color we want. So you should have the same colors in your palette as I do. So just give it a fill. Give your closed shape a fill. So those are, we were just drawing lines that are straight freeform lines built from connecting two anchor points. Now let's look at how Illustrator can help you control your lines a little bit more by using the Shift key while you're drawing. So again, take the pen tool, click, and then anytime after you click, you can just hit the Shift key. And as soon as you hit the Shift key, you can see that that line that Illustrator has given us shifts. It changes to 95 degrees, 45 degrees, or so that's 90 degrees. I'm gonna hit the escape key. This one is 45 degrees. Hit the escape key, escape. And here is a 0 degrees or horizontal line. And again, I'm gonna hit escape. Escape. So that gives you freeform lines, open, closed line, which turns into a shape, and constrained lines holding the Shift key down. So go ahead and save your work. So I'm going to do File, Save As. And what I want you to do is I want you to go here and I want you to call it your name, as you always did. So I'm just going to use my last name. Actually, I'm going to use my first name. I want you to make sure you use your first name. I haven't memorized your last names yet. And this is how I write the semester. So 22.3F. That's just so that things line up in my Finder. And then I'm calling this worksheet basic, and it's for GD 157. So I'm going to go ahead and save that. So do the same thing, and from then on it's just Command S, and I'll save over the same file. So let's go to the next one. And what I want you to do with this one, and again, you're still working on the Draw Here layer. I want you to draw 12 black line segments with different strokes. So I'm going to stop talking and just do this. And if you want to fast forward, feel free. Escape. Give it no fill. So I just drawing shapes. I'm not actually sure how many lines are here. I can count them, or I can actually take my selection tool and just click and drag right across here, and it will select all the lines. And here I can just go to my window and select document info. So document info, like the palette says, gives you information about your document. If I go to the hamburger icon on this palette and I want to choose selection only, objects, it tells me I have 11, so I need one more. So that's, in this case I could have counted, but in many cases you'll have a lot of objects, and it's actually very useful to use the document info palette to see what you actually have in your document or in your selection. So I'm going to go ahead and draw one more. And then I'm going to take a minute to make all of these different. So I'm going to take this one, and I just want different strokes on them. So I'm going to go ahead and open this stroke palette, and I'm going to just change the weight of this here. And maybe I'm going to do this with another one, give it a different color. And maybe with this one, I'm going to choose it, and I'm going to make the stroke. I'm going to look at using a dash line. So the dash line is very powerful in Illustrator because it allows you to do control multiple dashes within one line, and as well as the gap between them. So if I want a 12-point stroke with a 3-point gap, you can see that right away it changed that. And then I could change it so that, and then after that I have a 1-point dash, and maybe another 3-point gap, and then maybe a 12-point dash and a 3-point dash. And this gives you a lot of control over what the line looks like. So maybe have at least one in there where you look at different dashes using the dash control, using dashes. You can also add arrowheads. You can actually save profiles, so you can quickly reuse settings for your lines. I'm just going to try a few more of these, and maybe I'll try look at what it looks like when I make this corner rounded. So if you look at this one here, that's nice and thick. You can see what the rounded corner looks like, and the end caps as well. So all of these attributes here are something that you can set for every line. So if I want to look at what does it look like, the difference between an end cap that goes past the end of the point or ends at the point. Let's again look at a nice thick line here. So you can see here if I zoom in, and if I look at the end cap point, you can see that it extends beyond where the ending point is, and this one ends at the point. And there's lots of cases where you'll need one or the other. So it's good to know where those things are. So just keep going and apply different attributes to each one, so they're all a little bit different. You can use colors if you want. One little trick for using Illustrator is you have your cursor and you have something selected inside a box. You can actually use your arrow key and go up and down with it. So you can actually play around with the settings inside of a text box without entering new numbers all the time. You can just go up and down with the arrow key. There's other tricks to it too, but let's stop at that one for today. And let's do this one. Make this one really thick with and this is really interesting, and I'll show you in a later one how this can be really useful. Because if you have a really thick line like this, and you set a dash on it, where the dash is 1 point and the space is, let's say 20 points, and then let's just delete this. You can see that the dashes become very interesting because they start to look like repeating lines. And it depends on your end cap setting how that works. But this is actually a very useful technique for creating multiple lines that are all the space in between, and they all have the same spacing. I'm just going to select these two, and I'm going to set this to another dash line where I have 3. Another thing that can be really useful to look at is if you set yourself with a dash line, what happens when you change the end cap of the dash line? So if I'm here or here, it changes it because it's extending the end to a different point. So how do I do a dot? If I want a dotted line, I actually have to make my my dash 0, and that gives me a single point line. So here's a square dotted, and here's a dot dotted line. Okay, let's look at 2 more, and then I think we're done with this one. Let's make this just really, really thick. And let's try another dash here. And so this one is a dash line. So here you can see how it starts to look like a shape, right? This here becomes a shape. And if I change this so that I have maybe 4-point and a 6-point in between, you can start to see you get an interesting pattern here. But this becomes a shape. So go ahead and save it, and let's move on to the next one. So line tool, again, let's try. So far we've just been looking at straight lines. So a single click to start and escape to end. So let's go ahead and do that one more time with this longer open shape. So click, and you can see that Illustrator saved all the settings. I can actually, without ending my line, I can actually go over to the properties palette and change this. So I can go here, deselect that, and change this to 1 point, and continue to draw. If you put your point in the wrong place, like I click there, don't panic. And remember when we looked at raster versus vector. Vectors are very, very, very easy to change and recreate. So I did this one wrong. I'm going to go grab my direct selection tool, which allows me to select one of the points. So if I click on here, you can see that it deselected all the other ones. I can tell because the other ones become, I'm just going to zoom in so you can see here, you can see that the deselected anchor points are hollow and the selected ones are filled. And so I can use my direct selection tool and I can actually click on any anchor point and drag it so that it ends up in the place where I wanted it, just like I did on the first artboard. So I'm holding my spacebar down here to move the artboards across. So move my, just navigate differently. So again, this hand tool is also available under the magnifying glass. Yes, you can use the magnifying glass or the hand tool by clicking on the H, right? So that switches to the hand tool. The nice thing about using the spacebar is I can drag and move, and as soon as I let go of it, I'm back to my, so it's like I'm back to my pen tool. So it changes it to a temporary switch. Temporary while I need it, and then I switch right back to the pen tool. Okay, we're going to look at two different ways of creating these strokes, these curved lines. So again, Illustrator has different ways of doing the same thing, and it all depends on the context. This one is a little bit harder, so this is where the pen tool becomes a little bit challenging, very challenging to use. It's actually many people that first start using Illustrator, including myself, when I started using Illustrator in freehand, and I also learned how to use CorelDRAW. The pen tool is the hardest tool to learn how to use. And so don't get discouraged if you don't figure it out on the first try. This is one opportunity to try and use it, and as you work through it more, you'll get more used to it. The more you use it, the better you'll get at it. And again, if you make a mistake, you can fix it. This is vector, it's easy to correct. So what I'm going to do, what you do is if you're drawing a straight line, you click and let go. But if you're drawing a curved line, what you do is you click and drag. And you can see what it's doing is dragging out a handle. And if I hold down my shift key, it'll constrain the angle of the curve, which is very useful. So that's the first one. And you can see now when Illustrator extends the preview of what the line is going to look like, it's now on a curve. So we're going to do the same thing with the second one. We're not going to click and let go. We're going to click and drag, and I'm going to hold the shift key down until it lines up with that point, with the guide that I gave you. And I'm going to go down here and do this again. And this This time I'm going to click and drag and do the same thing. And here it gets a little bit tricky because we got to try and double back on this curved line. And this may be the hardest part of any tutorial that you do in Illustrator. It's the most basic one, but it is one of the hardest things to do. And so what you're going to do is you're going to hold down the Option key. So you can see here the keyboard, my keyboard display is showing this Option key. And what this does, it changes the cursor to a little triangle that pokes up. So you found this in the exercise you did in class. And what you're going to do is you're going to pull this all the way up to the top, hold the Shift key down, and let go. And now you can see that the line has changed to pointing up. You can do the same thing, go down here. We're going to do the same thing over again. And drag down, holding the Shift key to constrain the handles. And now I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take my Option key, drag this all the way up here, and then continue on with my line. So if you feel discouraged because you're getting stuck at this like the third artboard and you feel stuck, don't. If you want to leave it and come back to it later, that's fine. Do it at your own pace. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to do this next one here approximately, and draw down. Again, I'm holding my Shift key to constrain those handles, just to keep them a little bit under control, because those handles tend to be a little bit hard to handle. Pun intended. And so now we're done. So same thing. I hit Escape to stop drawing the line. And I got pretty close, but even I've been doing this for 25 years and it's still not perfect. So I may want to go back, and again, I'll take my direct selection tool and I can click on any of these, and you can see that now when I select it, I get the handle too. So maybe try and correct the curve a little bit too at the same time as you're correcting the position of the point. So you can move the point, but you can also change the handles. And you can see how it's actually very hard to get a perfect curve. If you're going for strict geometry, it's actually fairly complex to do this with the pen tool. So, if you feel discouraged, stop and just move on to another artboard and come back and look at this again. Don't give up on the pen tool. It's very powerful. It can do a lot of things that other tools are very cumbersome to do. The pen tool is actually very powerful, and it's worth mastering. So I'm just going to go Command 0 to see my whole artboard, and I'm going to save it. And then I'm going to go to the next artboard, which is practice making corners. So we're going to practice making shapes with sharp corners. So just take the pen tool, and I've asked you to draw 24 shapes. That's a good number of shapes to practice on. And the more that you use this tool, the more it'll become so easy to use, so intuitive. So Illustrator is very, it can be a very intimidating tool to use. There's lots of disciplines in graphic design that you can't do without Illustrator. So Illustrator is like absolutely essential for certain things. Like there's no way you can work in branding without learning how to use Illustrator. It's impossible. But there's some things you can do in graphic design without learning to use Illustrator. My caution would be is that there's actually pen tools in all of those other programs. Almost every program, including Photoshop, has a pen tool, and there's places for the pen tool in Photoshop as well. So learning how to use this pen tool in Illustrator it kind of, Illustrator is so fundamental to our discipline, our different disciplines in graphic design, that it's hard to avoid learning Illustrator, or similar tools are going to appear somewhere else. So again, I'm going to do the same thing. I lost count, and I'm going to select them all. Go to Document Info, see the objects that I have selected, and here you can see I have 20 paths. So I'll just draw 4 more. You're welcome to leave it at that, but if you want to do something a little bit more, select all of these and take this tool here called the Live Paint tool, and you can actually go in here and you need a fill first, so you need to make sure you have a fill selected with the tool, so you can choose any color you want. And you can fill individual shapes here. So it's actually kind of a fun, this is one of those, kind of one of these doodle ideas where you're just filling shapes. This is a relatively new tool. This used to be a lot harder to do in Illustrator, but it was still an enjoyable kind of exercise. People that like coloring or doing mandalas, right? But in this case, you have a lot more control. Here you can see here that right above the fill tool, there is actually some, you have the ability to switch colors here. So I can go and choose red or foreground color or black. So it's always going to allow you to choose black and then red or white. Right, so yeah, that is the and if you want to take a fill out, if you want it to be transparent again, I'm gonna hold my spacebar key down to move across. If I want any of these to be white again, because right now they are transparent, what you can do is switch your fill to none. So fill to none, then with this Live Paint Bucket tool, now if you click, it actually removes the color. This one has no color, but that's different than white, right? Because obviously if it's filled with white, you can't see through it. So if you want to have a little bit of fun with the Live Paint tool, do it. And there's other dartboards where we'll do it as well. So here we go to the next one. With this one, what I want you to do is no sharp corners. So again, 24 shapes. So let's get started here. So again, don't click and move. You want to click and drag. So undo, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, click and drag, and click and drag to end it. And then, but here you can start to have some fun with the shapes and start to create kind of like these. This is one artboard you shouldn't skip. So if you feel like you already know how to do these things, even if you know how to do them, I'll come back and try and use the pen tool like this to do a lot of shapes really quickly. And it's been so long since I've done this. I've been working in Illustrator every day for a year, and I've never got to do something like this where I just kind of have fun with shapes. So take the time to do this exercise, because you will learn how to really master this pen tool in different ways. What I try and do with these videos is I try and break it up into chapters so you can click through it. The last time I did it, the account wasn't working anymore, and I wasn't able to do that, which is unfortunate, because I do break it up into chapters when I record it. I've been trying to find a way to get the subscription renewed for it, but I may not have been able to do that by the time I post this. But in the future, I will try and post chapters, so you don't have to watch the whole thing. You can find the parts that you want and just do those. But even now, with this recorded video, you can actually skip ahead. So you can actually see where the artboards are, and you can skip ahead when you find something is moving too slow. You can actually work at double time. If you find that I talk a little bit too slow, working double time, you can pause, go for a break, and come back whenever you want. But what I would suggest that you do is you do all the work. Just because the tools are complex, like we've talked about already, and learning how to master them can help you in every course that you do, not just in graphic design, but if you're doing other visual art programs. Knowing how to use Illustrator is a huge advantage, and Photoshop as well. So when we get into Photoshop, also a very complicated tool in a different way, and knowing how to manipulate images and manipulate vectors, manipulate pixels, takes a lot of practice to learn how to do it. There's lots of things I would change about this. I can't say I totally love the way this one is working out, but I'm going to go and finish it, and I might come back and adjust a few lines later. So let's see how many, and I'm just going to, I don't remember this shortcut here, but under select, if I want to select all on the active artboard, because if I go here, select all, it's going to select all the vectors that I have in this document. But if I just want this active artboard, it's Command Option A. So Command Option A, if I have that right. All on active, okay, because I don't have an active artboard, right? Okay, Command Option A. Oh, I did Command Shift A. Command Option A. So that gives me all of the strokes on there. I'm going to go and open my document palette again. Document info, see how many I have here. I'm at 20, so I just need a few more. And we're going to try and avoid working with any complex way of combining the shapes in this tutorial. We're just going to focus on the kind of the basics, the basic elements, and how to manipulate them here. Okay, so if I want to go, and maybe I don't like the way these overlap there, I can just go like this and change this. Maybe I don't like this curve. So all these little things, take a minute just to see how it works, right? Like how you would actually do this. You may end up spending more time than you had budgeted this week for this class. It's going to be worth it in the long run for this learning the pen tool. Very, very powerful tool. So I'm done here, and I'm going to move on to this. This looks a little bit like a Moreau drawing. Not Moreau the software, Moreau the painter. Okay, so now we were looking at the pen tool. Let's look at using the Curvature Tool, which is a relatively new tool. So again, Illustrator keeps expanding, and there's updates all the time, so you kind of have to keep learning, like pay attention to the new features. This one works in some ways similar, but in some ways different than the pen tool, and it really is just for making curves. So how it works with this is just you can do a single click if you're making a curve, and a double click for a sharp point. So let's just get started here. I'm just going to click here, and then here I'm going to double click. And it's 3 points, so click, double click, click, and this one is actually a transition point, so it's also double click. No, that wasn't, no, sorry, that is not. Or is it? It must be. Okay, let's see what happens here. Okay, that did not work right, so we'll have to fix it later. Let's see if I can figure out how to do that one again. It's been a while since I've used this tool. So doing it. Let's see. I can figure out how to do this one again. I'm just going to go back and fix it later. But if you figure out how to do that, let's share that in class. Because so I'm just going to hit escape. So same as with the pen tool, when you want to end the line, you just hit escape. What I'm going to do is I'm going to actually use the pen tool to fix this. So if I hold my shift key down, I'm going to come back to this one in a minute. Let's try this one again here. I'm going to start this one again. Let's try here. So the curvature, I got the wrong tool here, that's why. Okay. Pen tool. So click, click, and double click. You can see here that my cursor indicator blinks twice, blinks every time that I click. And so if I double click, it actually blinks twice. Double click. That's right, it is a double click to get that transition one because it's basically a corner point. So that transition one's a little bit tricky. You can undo and do it again, or delete it and do it again. But basically, each one of these is a double click. When I get to the end, it's escape. So let's try this one again. If I'm going to do so for any curve, you need 3 points. So that's how the curvature tool works. So for these like arcs, I'm going to click in the center, and I'm going to click, double click here. And what is beautiful about the curvature tool is just how perfect this curve is. I mean, I still may want to go and make some adjustments just so that it's identical to the dashed line guide underneath. But for now, it's just really like getting used to the tool when you're drawing for the first time. So there, and here another one, double click, one in the center, double click, double click, double click, double click, single click, double click. So whenever you're not double clicking, Illustrator understands it as a curved line, and it's just gonna take those 2 points, and I made a mistake with my clicking here, and so I ended up with a weird line. So let's undo, Command Z, Command Z. So here I want to double click, single click, single click. That's a double click here. Double click, single click, double click, double click, single click, single click. So here we have fairly complicated line combining straight lines and curved lines. It would be very complicated to do these elegant curved lines with the pen tool. So I'm going to hit escape to stop drawing that line, and I'm going to do one more, and this one's a little more organic. So doing this wave pattern, just click, click, and double click, click, double click. So here I'm going to find the center of the arc, single click, and then double click at the end, single click in the center of the arc, double click at the end, single click, double click, single click, double click, single click, double click, single click, double click, and so on. And here we have So now I want you to, for this one, I want you to fill the page with a continuous curved line. You can mix curved and straight lines if you like, but I want you to really play around with this curved line, and you're really just doodling. So you're trying to figure out. So one continuous line. Don't worry too much about being representational. Like the worst thing you can do at this point is to try and draw something that represents something else. Like here, you're really just exploring the line itself and how it works, and kind of, like just practicing using the tool is the best thing to try and do. I mean, if there's some abstract shape like this that you want to make, that's great. But I would encourage you not to try and draw animals or eyes or things like that, because it limits your exploration of the tool. If you want to try something that we're not doing in this exercise, by all means, just so long as you're filling the page with curved lines. And you can alternate with straight lines if you want. It's good practice. Just fill this whole page. The more anchor points, the better, because it really gives you want to get to the point where you're doing this without thinking, right? Like you're thinking about the task that you're trying to achieve, as opposed to, oh, I'm clicking, double clicking, right? Like here I'm clicking, here I'm double clicking, or like I need this many points to make. You want to be to the point where you're just thinking about what you're trying to create on the screen, as opposed to having to think about, what to do with this tool to achieve that. So it becomes second nature. I would actually avoid these spirals if you can, because the composition becomes a little bit too centered on these 2 points, and you kind of lose the opportunity to really develop other points of interest, because those spirals are so recognizable and so strong. So again, this is a case of don't do what I'm doing. From the point of view of purely a composition, it's not as strong. I find this part here way more interesting than these two spirals. Okay, so kind of leave it at that. If you want to play in here with your, so hit escape to end, and if you want to play with the fill tool, by all means, feel free to fill in some of these shapes and practice with that one as well. It can be actually really fun. Okay, moving on to the next one. Let's look at shapes. So far we've been looking at just drawing lines and using the lines to create shapes. But now we're going to look at some shape tools, because Illustrator has several shape tools. So under here, there are several shape tools. This building has crazy set of fire alarms. So here, if you grab this rectangle tool, if you can't see the rectangle tool, it could be under the ellipse tool, depending on which one you use last. The rectangle tool, there's actually 2 ways to draw with it. You can draw from the corner where you start. So let's just click and drag, and you can see wherever you started, that's going to be the corner that you're drawing from. Or if you hold the Option key down, it'll draw from the center. So we're going to look at both ways. First of all, drawing a rectangle. And in order to keep this clean, let's actually give it no fill. Kill our fill there. So here we have a rectangle. And you can see that once I've drawn this rectangle, while it's still selected, I have all these tools around the rectangle that allow me to modify the shape of the rectangle. So I can drag these around. There's also this interesting tool too that is right here, and it's called the corner widget. So when all of these corners are selected, it's going to change, and it's going to add a make the corners rounded. It's still a rectangle, so Illustrator still understands it as a rectangle, but it understands it as a rectangle with curved corners. And like everything else in Illustrator, you have the ability to control these settings in different places. So if you look at this, I'm just going to get rid of these corners for now. If you see here this rectangle, as I drag it, you can see that the coordinates here change. So if I drag it up, it'll change. So if I want to change where it's positioned, I can just change these values here. So if I want to move this somewhere, like maybe if I want it right on the 10 pica point, I can just delete these here. So delete, enter, and it moves it over. Again, if I want to do it manually, semi-manually, but not quite entering numbers, I can just use the up and down arrow keys to move it. It'll move it. It'll change the coordinates here that I have highlighted. So let's look again at another. So this is the basics, right? A rectangle, once it's drawn, I can modify it. Click and drag from one corner. Can do the same thing here. But this time what I'm going to do is, as I'm drawing it, so I'm going to click and start dragging. Once I'm dragging it, I'm going to hold the shift key down, and that constrains it from a rectangle into a square. So again, let's do that again. I'm just going to click here in the top corner and start dragging it. And when I hold my shift key down, it turns it into a perfect square. So again, that's this concept of constraining. So we looked at constraining when we're drawing a line, constrain it to an angle. Constraining when I'm drawing shapes changes it from a kind of a free-form rectangle into a square. So same thing here, and this all of a sudden shows the complexity of the tool, but the power of it. So if I want to draw from the center, I want to draw a square from the center, I'm going to hold my Option key down and my Shift key, and that allows me to draw a square from the center. So maybe just practice a couple more of these on this artboard, drawing a rectangle, maybe a long skinny rectangle, maybe a long skinny rectangle that you draw from the center, maybe a little square, so hold the Shift key down, draw a square, maybe draw a long rectangle here. Just practice a few of these here, just to get some familiarity with the tool. Then let's move on to the circle tool. So underneath here again, any tool here that has a little triangle. Let's see here. So just looking here at the tool palette, all these tools that have a little triangle on them have tools underneath. Little expand your universe more. So clicking on any of these, I'm going to get all of these tools here. We're going to use the ellipse tool, so I'm going to select that. If I go here to the very bottom of the tool palette, you'll see here the ellipses. And again, ellipses means that there's more hidden underneath, or there's something that's been omitted. It means a bunch of different things. In UX, this is called a kebab. This one here is called a hamburger, and this one is called a kebab. So if you click on this, you'll see here that there's actually a bunch more tools that you have access to in Illustrator. And each of these falls under one of the categories that we've looked at. So you have your selection tools, your drawing tools, your type tools, your paint tools, your modifying tools, and your navigating tools. And so pretty expansive. If you find that a tool is missing from here, if it's not here, all you have to do is select it in here and you can use it right away. So this one is selected now, and I can draw this. I don't even know what this tool is. It looks like some sort of a target tool. And delete it. Let's go back to the ellipse tool, and we're going to do the same thing. You can see here that if I'm using the ellipse tool, which is the hotkey L, it can be a little bit hard to find where to place it. So when you're drawing circles, if you want to be precise with placement, you're always trying to place it from the center, because figuring out where the top and the left or right edges, it can be a little bit of a guessing game. So here is my circle, and same thing. If I want to resize it, Illustrator allows me to do that. The other thing that you'll see here is there's this handle here, which allows me to change this into a pie shape. I'm going to go here and I'm going to do the same thing, except this time I'm going to hold my Shift key down, and as you probably expected, this will give you a perfect circle. And if I want to resize this because it doesn't quite fit right, I'm going to do the same thing. But again, if I just drag the handle, freeform. If I want to constrain it to a circle, I'm going to hold the Shift key down. So here you can see how much easier it is to be precise when drawing circles. I'm going to draw from the center. I'm going to hold my Shift key down and the Option key, and the Option from the center and Shift, and that gives me a lot more precision. I'm going to have to zoom in to get this one totally right. So I'm going to go here. And you may have noticed what happened there. So if you don't click and drag, if you click and let go, that gives you a dialog box. So I can go ahead and enter coordinates for this. So I can make it that size. Same thing with Shift or Option. So I go Option. It's going to draw it from the center, as you probably expected. So that's another way to draw it. So you can click and drag or click. And that gives you a circle. So go ahead and try some more of these on the side. So just draw a couple of ellipses, maybe a horizontal one. Try drawing one from the center, an ellipse from the center, or a circle. Just a few on this artboard just to get a little bit of practice. See right away that I'm starting to draw some space looking shapes. Now I want you to go ahead and draw both of them. So switching back and forth, circles, draw some circles, 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 and then maybe switch to squares. So that's the hotkey M will give you some squares. So I'd suggest doing a similar amount that you did with the other ones. Do 20 or so, 24, and just try using different ways of drawing. So drawing from different sides, from different corners. So here I'm drawing from the bottom right. Try drawing from the top left. Try drawing from the center. And this is good practice. Okay, so these are drawing with squares and circles. Okay, so far we've been drawing. We did a little bit of transformation, but let's look a little bit more at how to transform. And I'm going to introduce a very complex idea. It's actually not hard to implement. It's a little hard to remember, but I'll show you a trick for how to remember what it is. So what we're going to do is we're going to practice transforming squares. So we're going to draw a square here. So again, holding the Shift key down to constrain it. And let's do another one here. But this time, what we're going to do is we are going to take the selection tool, and if you move the selection tool around this shape, so with the shapes, if the shape is deselected, just take the selection tool, which is the hotkey V. So take the selection tool, select it, and you can see that yes, if I go here, I can click on any of these corners and change the size. If I click on a corner, I can resize it too. I could change these. We're going to look at changing those in a bit. But if I do that, I can do that. But if you see, if I move my cursor to the outside of the corner, just the outside of the corner, I get a little rotation icon. So let's go ahead and rotate our square. And again, you know, I can freeform it, so I just kind of eyeballing it, or if I hold my shift key down, it will constrain it to an angle. So let's constrain it. You just transformed your first shape. You changed it from a square into a diamond. So totally different product. Let's take the ellipse tool, or the rectangle tool again, and let's draw another square here. This time when we end, what we're going to do is we're going to switch to the direct selection tool. So selection tool, direct selection tool. Selection tool selects all the object. Direct selection tool will select part of it. So I'm going to go ahead and switch to the direct selection tool, and I'm just going to click on this corner, and you can see as soon as I do that, it deselects the other anchor points, and I can take this and change the shape of it. Okay. What we're going to do this time is we're going to do something, again, complex but extremely powerful. So this is one of the most powerful transformation I don't want to call it a technique, transformation, something that you'll do in Illustrator, at least at the beginning. So let's go ahead and do this. Draw a rectangle and draw a square. So from here, what we're going to do is we're going to switch over to our selection tool. So that's the hotkey V. So V, it switches to the selection tool. I'm going to click and drag across here to select both of them. So I'm drawing a marquee. You can see it makes these little little dotted selection area. It's going to select both of these shapes. What I want you to do is I want you to do something where, again, you're using two keyboard keys while you're dragging. So you're going to drag it straight down like this. But again, I want you to constrain it. So I want you to constrain it to 90 degrees, drag it straight down, and while you're dragging this, don't let go of any of those keys or your mouse. While you're dragging it, hold the Option key down too. And you can see what it does. As I'm doing this, as I'm dragging it, it changes the cursor to a double arrow. Because I'm clicking, you can see that my cursor marker with the blue changes from orange to blue. So it tells you that I'm clicking. As I'm clicking, I'm holding the Shift key down and the Option key. And that makes a copy. Super powerful. You just made a copy of two shapes. You constrained it with one movement. You actually created two more shapes. And here's where it gets really amazing. And that is, you can make this transformation, which is this copying those shapes. You can do it again. So you didn't just copy it, you copied it a certain distance, and Illustrator will do that transformation again. So if you go up here to Object, Transform, the command is transform again. But you can see right away, if you look at your keyboard, that those important commands, so undo, cut, copy, paste, Command A for select all, Command S for save, those are all really close to the Command key, and so is Command D. And the reason is that this command is actually very powerful. It's something that you'll use all the time. So I'm going to go Command D, and you can see that it did the same thing again. It created another set of shapes. So I've put this here into the guide to help you think about it a little bit more, but we're going to keep coming back to this, and I'll keep showing you this Command D is a very important transformation command. We'll call it a command, where you're moving and copying something the same distance multiple times. I can hit Command D as many times as I want, and it'll keep doing that same transformation. Now what I want you to do is again look at these corner radius widgets. So if you select this with the selection tool, it selects all of the corners at the same time. So let's do that. Let's drag this down, and now we end up with what looks like a lozenge shape. It doesn't let you do two shapes at the same time, so you have to do one at a time. You can go like this and like this. Transform. You can see here that in Illustrator, on the Properties palette, these are the main things that you're going to work with. So the position, the width, the height, and the angle, those are the main things. And you have these two transform to as, which is to mirror it, to flip it horizontally and vertically. But again, you see this ellipsis, and underneath this ellipsis are more, and here we have the ability to change our corner radius. And I'm going to see if I can do it. I don't actually know if I can do it with two shapes. You can't. It doesn't look like you can. Maybe I can. Maybe I can. Just putting in the maximum amount. So let's see if I can change. Yes, so I can do it with one of the shapes at a time. So again, you're doing the same thing in two different places. So here you're using the widget. You know, I can undo this at any point. Here you're using the widget that's on the shape. There's also the ability to do it numerically here. So if I wanted my corner to be two picas, one pica, you can see here that it's automatically entering it for me. One other thing I want you to look at here is when I did this here, when I changed this, all of them changed at the same time. And that's because you can see here in the center, there is this link toggle that's turned on. If I turn this off, all of a sudden I can do one of them and not the other ones. Okay, so let's just undo this and go back to the shape here. And let's, on this one, let's do precisely that, but let's use our direct selection tool. So A, and what I'm going to do here, just to be clever, is I'm going to hold the shift key down to deselect. So again, if I have them all selected and I get my selection tool, so I just use my selection tool to select them all, and then I take the direct selection tool and I click here, it's gonna deselect the other ones. But what the shift key allows me to do as well, which is super powerful, is if I hold the shift key down, I can deselect one of them. Do it however you want, but what I want you to do in the end is I want you to have try changing multiple corners at the same time except for one. So if you want to go and select each one, you can hold the shift key down, and that allows you to select multiple points. So that is playing with that tool. Now what I want you to do is I want you to fill this with a pattern of rectangles. So what I want you to do is create a rectangle, maybe a square, maybe another rectangle, and maybe a little rectangle, maybe another rectangle here. Let's just make a column of rectangles, squares and rectangles, maybe a really little one, maybe another little one. And now I'm going to switch to the selection tool, take this and drag it. And then I'm going to go Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D. And that quickly created a pattern. It's not the most elegant pattern. You may come up with something, you will come up with something much more beautiful than this, but it's a quick way to create a pattern is by just Command D, transform again. One thing that you saw in the last exercise is selecting while using the Shift key. So if I all of a sudden decided that I wanted all of these rectangles to be different, I could just go like this and select only these. And I'm holding the Shift key down. You can see here I'm continuing to hold the Shift key down as I do this. And what that does is that just like it did with the direct selection tool, it allows me to select more than one object. Just by clicking, holding the Shift key down, it allows me to select multiple objects. And then what I can do, I can go in here to my transform, and I can actually give these a corner radius in one corner. And you may want to do that with another one as well. Just go and click and select. So if you find that this is just a little bit too boring, you want to add a little bit more interest to your pattern, under the transform, you can go here and change the corner radius of one of them. All right, Command S to save. And we're going to look at transforming circles. So again, the circle is the hotkey L. And let's draw a circle here. And from now on, we're just going to do copy paste. So I'm going to position this kind of in the right spot. Try and be as accurate as you can. This tutorial is getting a bit long, so I'm trying to move through it fairly quickly. But all I did was, as I dragged it across, I held my Shift key down to constrain it and the Option key to copy it. And for some reason my cursor is not changing. Let's try that again. I think it's this Cursor Pro thing that's limiting it. Let's see. Turn this off. No, it's not doing it right now. Illustrator's not being kind to me. But what it's doing is I'm copying and transforming at the same time. And now I'm going to do the same thing where I grab one of these bounding box anchors and I drag down, and I'm going to hold my Shift key as I drag to constrain it. I'm going to make another copy of this, so I'm going to take this one here and I'm going to drag it down here. And this time I'm not going to hold the Shift key down because I don't want to constrain the angle of it too much. And what I want to do is just position it in the center there. And I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to take this corner and I'm going to drag it down. I'm going to hold the Shift key to constrain it. But this time I'm going to transform it from the center by holding the Option key down. So you'll start to see a pattern here. Shift always constrains. It also lets you select multiple things, but Shift, when you're transforming, allows you to constrain. So it allows me to constrain the angle, constrain the shape, keep it consistent. And when I'm dragging, the Option key allows me to copy. So that's super powerful things to remember. Let's finish off these ellipses here. Draw this a little bit wider. Nudge it back. So I'm just using the arrow key to move it back into place. And I'm going to go and draw one here. I'm going to take my selection tool. So that's hotkey V and drag this across like that. And then I'm going to show you the marquee here. I'm going to drag right across like this to select all of these. And this time I'm going to do one more thing to it, just to, so it's a way of holding objects together so when you transform them, they stay in the same position. I could just take this and drag it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to group it, Command Group. And that way I can just click on it once and it selects them all. And I'm just going to click somewhere in the center. If I click along the edge here, it'll transform it. But what I want to do is I want to click on one of these anywhere inside the center here. So I'm going to click here, and I'm just going to drag down here. And you'll notice that because there's no fill, you can't click inside the circle. You have to click on the line because there is no fill. It's just a line that is formed as circle. So let's just drag this down. And again, Command D is going to transform again. Again, we're going to do the same thing with ellipses. We are going to form a pattern. You can overlap them. That might be a little more interesting than the last one. And try some other shapes in here. Starts to look like some spacing. That's okay. And again, if you get lost and wonder, so we can group this object and group it. If you get lost and don't know where that transform again is, you don't know what the keyboard shortcut is, object transform, transform again, Command D. So I'm going to go ahead and drag this, and this time my cursor changed, which is great. So I'm getting the double cursor on there. Command D, Command D, Command D. Now I have a bunch of, I'm just going to move this so it all sits nicely on the artboard like that. And now I have a bit of a pattern. Again, this pattern, we're going to do a section on patterns where I'll show you how to different ways of creating patterns. You can actually make your patterns much more interesting than this. So let's look at some more complicated tools, and then we're going to look at, so far we've been looking at changing the position of objects in 2 dimensions. We're going to look at the depth. That'll be the last thing we do. So this worksheet's almost over. So let's look at the polygon here, the polygon tool. So again, underneath shapes here is the polygon tool. And again, I can draw from the top left, and I'm just going to draw down, but it always draws from the center. So I'm going to start in the center here, and I'm going to hold the shift key down. It doesn't make any difference with this. All it does is it fixes the angle. It doesn't change the proportions. If I want to change the proportions, I got to do that by transforming it afterwards. You can see here that there's just one polygon tool. There's no triangle tool. So how do we change the number of sides on a polygon? Well, I've already showed you here, but let's drag this across just to demonstrate. And you can see along the side here, there's a widget. And it's actually easier to see here without that one. So let's do it here. Along the side here, there's a widget. If my cursor goes over the widget, you get a plus minus, and I can drag this up and down, and it changes the number of sides. So let's leave it here at a hexagon? Octagon? No. I'm not even sure. I think it's a sexagon. Sextagon. Okay. I'm going to turn this into a triangle, and then you can see that Illustrator is not that great at keeping the size the same, but that's okay. We're going to fix that ourselves. So just resize this. And then I just want you to do the same thing. I want you to create all of these shapes here. So just drag this down and cross. Here, and this is one less side. We already have this one, but yeah, let's just nudge this one down. And then I'm going to go Command D, Command D, Command D. Select this one. Add a side. Add more sides. And it maxes out at a certain point. From then on, if you want more sides, we're going to have to, there's different techniques for splitting them, or for actually drawing it by hand using geometry. Our last shape tool that we're going to do is the star tool. So this one is complicated in the sense that there's two radius. So you're drawing this radius and this radius. You have to figure out both. So if you just draw a star, you are not going to be able to control that. So if you want to control it, you're going to have to hold the Option key down and use the dialog box. So for this one, I'm using a radius of 3 picas, and you can see here the advantage of working with picas. It's a nice number that's easy to understand, but also you get some nice increments. You don't have a lot of decimals to work with. So let's try that one again. So 3 picas and 1 pica. So that means the outer points are 3 picas, the inner points are 1 pica. The inner radius is 1 pica. And so what happens if you do 20 points? You get this pretty amazing one. And then let's try, I don't even know how this many this is. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So it must be 10. So 10. And this one must be 50. Close, very close guess. And this one could be 100. Must be 100, yeah. So you can see how you have much control over controlling this. One thing that Illustrator is so good at is controlling your creation of shapes and the geometry of them. So I have a couple more exercises here to do, and then you're going to do a couple more on this worksheet, and then you're going to switch over to the exercise. So let's go ahead and finish this. Let's make 24 different stars and polygons. So I'm just going to create a bunch of, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make some of these really big so it's easier to see. Let's try 10 and 10 and 9. It starts to look like a spirograph gears. So let's take the polygon tool, which doesn't have a hotkey, and let's create some shapes here. Shape. You can see you can get a square because a square is a polygon. And you know, if you don't hold the shift key down, you won't constrain the angle. I'm going to switch over to the star tool, and let's create a couple of stars in here. So I'm going to switch here to the selection tool so that I can change the size of these. And let's change the number of sides. See if we can do 3. So here this gives you a very odd shape, and it's actually a star shape, but with so little difference between the two radius that it starts to look like something else, some multiple sided thing with different sided widths. A little bit odd shape. So get a bit of a different triangle. And that's a star as well, right? Because you have 2 radiuses in there. Let's do some different numbers of sides. Let's try going quite a bit smaller. Let's try inverting it. So you can see when you invert it, it actually looks the same. So those radius are actually, not one of them doesn't have to be the points. If you invert it, then you end up with the points out. So let's compare those two. I just did this one here, and let's switch it so that it's 2 and 3. And I guess it is the points, because that's quite a bit different. So, oh no, it's the same one. That's this one here. Okay. So they're identical. So they're totally invertible. Can switch them around. So that's drawing with polygons and stars. And let's, before we stop working on this worksheet, I need to show you how to change the order of things in space. And I'm going to show you a couple of ways to do it, and it's important to understand a couple of ways, because without it, you can't do things quickly and you can't see what it's like. So the way I want to show you how to do it is by using the layers palette. You can see here, if I open up this, if I turn this triangle on the layers palette, you can see that it shows me all of the shapes inside the palette. If I select a shape, you can see that when you draw something, it doesn't always appear on the top of the layers palette. To simplify this, we're going to create a new layer, and we're going to call this layer Arrange. We're going to lock this other layer so that we don't get confused, and we're just going to draw on the Arrange layer. So you can work with any shape you want here. Here I am working with circles, and I'm going to draw them in random order and then show you how we can rearrange them in space. Right now I have no stroke, so it's actually helpful to have different sizes. It's a little bit easier to see what's going on. But I'm going to select all of them. So again, I took my selection tool and I clicked just above them, and I'm going to give them all a stroke at the same time. I mean a fill. So I'm going to just give it a fill of white, and right away you can see that some of them are in front and some of them are behind. I'm going to change the size of this one just to make it a little bit easier to see how they're different. So all 3 different sizes, and I'm actually going to throw a square in there as well, just to make it a couple of squares, just to make it a little more interesting. So if I want these all in order from this one to be on the bottom and this one to be on the top, one way I can do it, so there's lots of ways to do this in Illustrator. One way I can do it is by clicking on it and say Arrange, Bring to Front, or Bring Forward. So if I bring it to the front, it's going to go all the way to the front. I can hold my Shift key down and select that one, and again go Arrange, Bring to Front. And it's getting pretty close to being in the order that it's supposed to be. I can send this one to the back. Can go Arrange, Send to Back. So that's one of the quickest ways to do it. It's just by using the context menu. There is a keyboard shortcut as well, but I'm not going to throw another keyboard shortcut at you today. Here we have them in the order that we wanted, from the top to the bottom. So I'm going to take all of these and I'm going to drag them down here, and I'm actually going to use my Align palette to align them all to the center. So this aligns them to the bottom. I'm going to align them to the center, and what I want to do is I want to change the order. So I want this one in the back now, and in order to do that, one way that might actually be a lot easier is to actually use the Layers palette, because if I expand this, you can see here that I can see all of the items here, and if I take this one and I drag it up, it goes to the front. Take this one and drag it second. Take this one and drag it so that it's third. Take this one and drag it so it's fourth. And done. So that's 2 ways to change the order of things in space. This one, using the Layers palette, is actually the way to have the most kind of control and to see what's going on. If you're ever wondering where something has disappeared to, this can be a good way to find it, is in the Layers palette. It kind of dissects what you're working on there. So for this last one, I want you to draw a staircase that goes all the way around. So just draw a bunch of shapes on here and then rearrange them so that you have a staircase. And again, you're seeing it from the bird's eye. It might actually be easier to have all similar shapes. So you may just want to draw one shape. To do it quickly, draw one shape and just copy them all, make a bunch of them. So I'm just selecting, clicking, and holding the Option key down and the Shift key in order to get I'm going to try working with this many here. It gives me enough that I can enough shapes that I can make an interesting, a visible staircase. So I can drag this on top. You can see here that these were drawn later, so they actually ended up, the order ended up in the right order. I'm getting lucky with this. They're all ending up in the right order so far. Oh, this one's in the wrong order. So I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to bring it to the front. So this is just getting you used to this idea of that these objects sit in a two-dimensional space, but they also sit in a three-dimensional space. So they can be in front and behind each other. So arrange, bring to front. If you're doing this a lot, you'll see here that there's a keyboard shortcut that's a little bit complicated. The command square bracket is probably the easiest one to remember. You might have to do it a few times to get it there. Command square bracket. So I'm going to go command square bracket. And I'm actually going to, with this next one, I'm going to move all of these to the front so I can do them quicker. Command square bracket. Command square bracket. And again with this one, arrange, bring to front, and arrange, bring to front. It's kind of a modernist looking staircase. I remember when I was a kid, we were pretty poor when we lived in South America. We didn't have very much money at all, but because my parents were white, they knew a lot of rich people wanted to associate with them. And one group of people that wanted to associate with my mom in particular, because my mom was a registered nurse in Canada, was doctors wanted to get to know her so she could teach them English. And so this one doctor became friends with my mom, and he would invite us over to use his pool. And he had this huge pool, and he also had like a ornamental garden pool kind of thing in front of his place with these crazy steps like this. And it was so much fun to play on them, jump on them when I was a little kid. That's what it makes me think of. But this will make you think of different things. But really, it's this idea of ordering things in space. That is another thing you'll have to do in Illustrator. So go ahead and save it. And last thing I want you to do is, this is an Illustrator file. You are never going to submit an Illustrator file. You can't place an Illustrator file anywhere. An Illustrator file is a working file. When you are saving this file to submit or place on your mural board, what you're going to do is you're going to save it as a copy. And this is very important. You want to save a copy. Don't save as your original, because chances are you're going to lose something. And I'm going to go over this repeatedly in this course. Working file is an Illustrator file, is AI. Your copy that you make to submit is going to be a PDF. So you're going to save a copy, and that preserves your Illustrator file. You're going to see the file name will not change. It'll stay the same. You're just going to choose Adobe PDF here. You'll see at the very end, Illustrator always adds the word copy. I want you to delete that. Either delete it when you're saving it or delete it afterwards. Here you can choose a number of artboards. In this case, you're going to save them all. You're going to click Save. This is where you can optimize it a little bit. So by deselecting Preserve Illustrator Editing Capabilities, it reduces the size. When you start placing images in here, This will reduce the size a lot now too. There is actually images placed in here. All that grid layer, in order for it not to interfere with the work you were doing on top, is actually converted into an image. So what I want you to do is I want you to downsample that, and I want you to use JPEG. So this is going to be what you're going to do every time. You're going to set it to high, JPEG, and 150. So average downsampling, 150, JPEG, and you can do this one as well. This is for color bitmaps, grayscale bitmaps, and monochrome bitmaps. Actually saves it as a different type of format. You don't do JPEG for bitmap. Zip is okay. And go ahead and save it. And here you can see you still have this AI file. I'm going to close that. And because you're using your file format and folder structure format that I taught you, this is going to be really easy for you to find files. And here you can see under here, this is because I've been teaching courses for a while. I have a few years of them. Super weird to think about that. But here I have my workspace. So this is the number 2 exercise, transform. And here is, this one is, you can ignore that. You'll have 2 in there, one with your name and one with that. You're not going to submit this. This is a worksheet. You're also going to save your exercise in here. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.